his eldest son, of the same name. See Thomas Cree the Younger. Thomas Cree was a Scottish historian, writer, and preacher born in the town of Duns in November 1772. Early life. Thomas Cree was born in Duns, the eldest of a family of 4 sons and 3 daughters. His father was a manufacturer and merchant in Duns, and lived to witness the literary celebrity of his son. His death did not occur until 1828. Tommy was educated at the high school in Edinburgh. He was nursed in the class of secession called anti-burghers, during the time when it still retained much of the primitive earnestness and simplicity of the old days of the Covenant. Upon being sent to the parish school, young Cree soon became not only an apt scholar, but distinguished for applying the habits of hard work in which he would later employ in his historical and antiquarian research. This progress, however, was somewhat alarming to his cautious father, who saw no reason for impoverishing a whole family to make his firstborn a finished scholar. Had these paternal purposes been carried out, perhaps the future biographer of John Knox and Andrew Melville would have become nothing better than a thriving Berwickshire storekeeper, or a prosperous mercantile adventurer in London. But kind relatives interposed, and a boy was allowed to follow his original bent. This he did so effectually that before he had reached the age of 15, he was himself able to become a teacher in 2 country schools successively. Education and marriage. At the age of 16, Thomas Cree enrolled as a student in the University of Edinburgh. His favourite studies at the university were those allied with ethics, philology, and history. In this way his course went on from year to year, his studies being frequently alternated with the laborious work of a schoolmaster, but his mind exhibiting on every occasion a happy combination of student-like diligence. In September 1795, he was licensed to be a preacher by the Associate Presbytery of Kelso, and in this capacity his first public attempts were so acceptable that, little more than a month after being licensed, he received a call from the Associate Congregation in Potter Row, Edinburgh, to become the second minister. A short time after he had entered the work of the ministry, he married Miss Janet Dixon, daughter of a respectable farmer in Swinton, to whom he had long been attached. The long marriage lasted until the death of his wife some years later. Ministry. At the outset of his ministry, Thomas Cree's sermons were distinguished by a careful attention to those requirements of eloquence and rules of oratory in which he excelled. Indeed, the older brethren seem to have been of the opinion that Cree's eloquence and speech was carried to such an undue length that it was in danger of glorifying himself more than the Word of God. He soon appears to have been of the same opinion himself, more especially after a missionary tour through the Orkney Islands, hitherto in a state of grievous spiritual destitution, but now eager to hear the word of life, in whatever form it was proclaimed, and there he saw, in the demeanor of his primitive audiences, the vast importance of the great doctrines of salvation, as compared with those mere human appliances by which it is adorned and recommended. This wholesome conviction brought him back, not, however, with recoil into the opposite extreme, but into that happy medium where the true grandeur of the subject is allowed its full predominance, and where its expression is valued by how much the speaker himself becomes invisible behind his all-important theme. This, indeed, is the secret of true pulpit eloquence, an eloquence Cree attained after his return from Orkney. The consequence was that his acceptability as a preacher increased, his congregation became more numerous, and a deeper spirit of earnestness was manifested in the general bearing and character. The same spirit of disinterested devotedness to his work was also evinced by Mr. McCree in trials which some may reckon equally hard to be withstood. Though his flock was numerous, it was chiefly from the humbler classes, so that his income was a small one, and in 1798, the price of provisions rose so high that families of limited means were reduced to near or outright poverty. In this state of things, the congregation of Potter Row adopted the generous resolution of increasing the salary of the minister, but no sooner did he hear of it, than he wrote to them a letter earnestly dissuading them from the measure. "The allowance which you promised me," he said, "when I first came among you as your minister, and which has been always punctually paid, though not so liberal as what may be given to others of the same station in this place, has hitherto been sufficient. From any general knowledge I have of the state of your funds, it is as much as you can be supposed to give, especially considering the burdens under which you labor. The expense of living has indeed been increasing for some time past, but the incomes of tradespeople have not increased in proportion, and as the most of you are of the description, I don't consider myself entitled to make any increasing demand upon you." This kind negation was gratefully received, and inserted in the minute book of the congregation. Here, however, the disinterestedness of the pastor did not terminate. That period of famine, so universal throughout Britain, and still well remembered in Scotland as the dearth, had reached its height in 1800, so that the middle were now transformed into the lower classes, while the lower were little better than paupers. At this crisis the minister stepped forward with a generous proposal. It was that, in consequence of the prevalent poverty, the amount of his stipend should be reduced. The people, however, who were able to appreciate his motives, refused to consent, and thus ended a contest that was equally honourable to both, the Scottish Reformation and controversy. After this, the life of Mr. McCree was fated for some time to be embittered by ecclesiastical controversy. The great subject of religious debate in Scotland has been, since the Reformation, not so much about Christian doctrine as about Christian polity. What is the duty of the state in aiding, upholding, and fortifying the spiritual government of the Church? And what is the nature and amount of that deference which the Church should render to the state in return? The relationship between these powers was fully established in Scotland by the first and second books of discipline, and finally ratified by the Westminster Confession of Faith. But toward the close of the last century, the principles of the French Revolution, so active in other countries, had also found their entrance into Scotland, and that they menaced not only the civil but also the ecclesiastical authority of the state. This was especially the case in that body called the Secession, to a part of which Mr. McCree belonged. The seceders had caught that Gallican spirits are hostile to kings and rulers, and they now found out that all connection between church and state should cease. Each was to shift for itself as it best could, without the aid or cooperation of the other, while kings and magistrates, instead of being bound by their office to be nursing fathers of the church, were engaged to nothing more, and could claim nothing higher than what they might effect as mere members and private individuals. In this way the voluntary principle was recognized as the only earthly stay of the Church's dependence, and the party who adopted it thenceforth became, not seceders from the establishment, but dissenters. It was thus that they closed and bolted the door against any future reunion with the parent Church, let the latter become as reformed and as pure as it might. In this painful controversy, Mr. McCree was deeply involved, and he took the unpopular side of the question, holding fast by those original standards of the secession which the majority were so eager to abandon. The result was that numbers and votes prevailed, so that he, and 3 conscientious brethren of the Church who held the same principles with himself, were formally deposed in 1806. The dissidents, under the new name of the Constitutional Associate Presbytery, were thus dispossessed of their churches, but not of the congregations, who still adhered to them. They repaired to new places of worship and continued to exercise the ministry as before. In this way they formed a separate and distinct, though small and unnoticed body, until 1827, when they united themselves with another portion of protesters from the same synod, under the common title of Original Seceders.